So we are going to go through some of the motion controller shortcuts and gestures and techniques that we've designed for the motion controllers. And before we just go ahead and run through them one by one, I just want to give you a very quick idea of our design philosophy behind that. One of the main things we wanted for the motion controllers was for the user to be able to change what they're doing while they're creating, and almost very much inspired by art tools or music tools, where you can, while you're doing something, press one button, make it do something else. And that sort of sensitivity was our priority in designing the motion control scheme. So as a result, it's not one of the things that you can just pick up and find out. We need to do tutorials for it and demos for it. But hopefully once you learn it and you know them all, it makes the creation experience much more flowing.
It does take a little bit longer to learn, and because of that, I'm here to help because I'm in charge of teaching and creating the tutorials on the team. So I'm here to help out Kareem. I'm going to be guiding us through all the different gestures. One thing I wanted to mention was there's only one move tutorial in the beta, but there will be more in the final release of the game.
Cool.
But to keep you going and to help you out, we're going to run through these gestures and controls now.
Yeah, brilliant. And we'll talk about them when we're going through them. We'll give you some examples of what to do with that sort of control scheme as we're going.
We're also going to talk about, we're going to give you the official terminology so that when we talk about things, you know what we're talking about. So should we get started?
Let's go.
We haven't got a lot of time, so we're going to go through these quite quick. But these videos will be posted to indreams.me and Twitch and YouTube for your reference later on, so you can go back through it, pause things and review it and all that sort of thing.
Brilliant.
So should we start with primary and secondary imps?
Yeah, let's do it.
So explain what that means.
So basically, the primary imp
is the one that has the facial features on it, and the other one doesn't. And most of your actions are done using your primary imp, and your secondary one is the one that has your palette menu on. So there are some operations in Dream with motion control that you use the two imps to do them, but most of the time you will be using your primary imp to do your operations.
And how do you change if you're left-handed?
So to change to your left-handed, you press the start button, and then you pick the preferences. And in accessibility, you pick whether you are right-handed or left-handed from down here. So if you press left and then you go back, it swaps it. So now the secondary imp becomes this one, and this becomes your primary.
Yeah. Cool.
There we go.
There we go.
And now to change back. Oh, that's confusing. There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
There you go. Stability. And
It's better.
got it.
Right.
Okay, so another thing you're going to need to do a lot is calibrate your imps.
Yes.
Now, obviously, you're going to want to sit in front of your camera, pretty square on, so the camera can always see the spheres on the end of your controllers. But if they do go a little bit iffy, what do?
You press and hold the start button.
Do you want to show the start button on the camera?
There. This one here, and you hold the moves in a comfortable position, and make sure that you're facing the camera, and then you press and hold, and you can see them pop to the center like that.
It's often a good way to see if your imps in calibrating is to just pop the menu open and see if it's in like the middle of the screen.
Yeah.
So that's cool. What about, so we know about the assembly menu. How do you bring up that menu?
So to bring the assembly menu, using your secondary motion controller, you press the T button.
And what's the T button?
It's this button over here.
Okay. The
Like
trigger.
The trigger.
The trigger.
And
the cool thing about that is that you can have your palette open, and you can even keep it open and just get it out of the way while you're working. So it's really, the feeling is like holding a palette with your hand when you're painting.
Or something. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. And also, I forgot to mention, you can calibrate using either start button on either controller.
Yes.
So let's talk about imp reach.
Yeah.
Now it might be worth putting some stuff in the level so you can set your imp reach. So imp reach is, because the motion controllers are in real 3D space, you can move them in and out of the space in the scene using your arms, and it will give you a direct one-to-one movement. But obviously, scene has the 3D space in the game has to map to the real 3D space that your arms are in. And often things might be close or far away. So you can set your imp reach, and what that means is that your imps will reach into the scene a different amount based on what your imp reach is. And Karim's going to demo that now.
Yeah, I've just made this sort of multiple islands here, and on it I will put these blue cones to demonstrate what Richard was explaining. So I'll switch the grid off now. So by default your reach is very symmetric to what your hand is doing here. So I can, if I put my hand as far as I can, the maximum I can reach is, as you can see with this cone, I can put it that far. I can't put it over on this other platform because my arm, you see from the side, can't get there. So we have this concept of imp reach, which basically all you do is you put the object that you want to reach between your two hands like that, and then you press the two move buttons together like that. And you've seen this sort of number that just appeared on the screen temporarily, and basically I have just now changed in size. Look how my imp now has increased in size, and now my hand reaches that far. So if I hold this and I want to put it over there, it's now reaching, so because I am a bigger imp. And if I have a very tiny, let's put a tiny little triangle over here, a cone, and I do the imp reach on that. If I'm just working very minutiae here, see, like my hand now is very small. This is the maximum I can place an object, and when I'm doing small details I can work within that. And in one press, if I want to get large again and work over there, I do the same thing again, and now I can place this object quite far. Zoom out, change my imp reach, and now I can reach it. So you see, this is quite a useful concept to get your head around. It really makes sense when you start having quite varied scale in your scene. So if my world is starting to sort of fill up like that, and I have big mountains in the distance like that, and I also have very small things that I'm working on in the foreground, that's when it really comes in handy, because you can be working and doing quite small operations, and then you want to change and work on this mountain scale. So now I can just in one drag pull myself there. So this takes getting used to, but once you get used to it, it's very handy. You will just always remember, put the object that you want to work on or you want to get to between your two controllers and then press, and then you will see that flashing number, and that basically makes you large to work on that scale. You're now mountain scale sort of imps.
It's worth pointing out that you can grab an object from any distance with the grab, which we'll talk about in a moment. And imp reach actually has wider importance when you're moving around the scene, because as we will talk about now, you use the move buttons to move around. So do you want to talk about that?
Yes.
The grab cam.
That's true. So the basic function for moving around in using this scheme is pressing the grab cam button, which is the move button, on either.
Do you want to show the camera?
Yeah, this button here, or on the secondary and the primary. And basically what it does is that it freezes it makes you grab that point in space on the whichever controller you've pressed the button on. So now, and you can pull yourself towards it or push yourself away. So if you see here, I'm grabbing and letting go, grabbing and pulling myself and letting go. A very important tip, by the way, is don't try to make movements that hurt your hand like that. You can grab and let go and do it in several times like that, so it sort of is more comfortable. And you can use the two controllers, so you can navigate around the scene pressing them alternatively. Some people like to just use one, some people like to use the two, so you sort of find out what is more comfortable to whichever case you're working. But that goes hand in hand with the previous point of the imp reach.
Yeah, because when you're using the move buttons to grab cam, it's very important where the tip of your imp is in 3D space, which is different from when you're grabbing things. So the imp reach becomes most important when you're actually using the grab cam to move around.
Absolutely.
So if you want to move very quickly into the distance of your scene, you can set the imp reach to something in the distance, and then you can do it in just a couple of moves.
Look, I'll show you this. I'll make myself very small here, so you can see my grabbing now is so small that if I were to drag myself all the way to that mountain, it will take me ages, because that's the extent of my reach. But if I look at that mountain, change my imp scale, now within one drag I have got there. Yeah. So it's definitely, like Richard is saying, very important, the imp reach with the grab cam, to understand them both together.
And also, when you do change your imp reach, you can see when your imps intersect with objects in the scene. You can kind of use that to kind of gauge where they are and give yourself an idea of whereabouts they are in 3D space.
Yeah.
And the other point to make is, when you use the grab cam, is to just wiggle it around a little bit each time you grab, so you can get a sense of where you are, like Kareem's doing there.
Like that. See, and when you change your imp reach, remember when I made myself change my imp reach to look at that mountain, for example, and I do that. Remember that your imp now is gigantic because you've made it very big. So if you forget and you want to go back and work on something small with a gigantic imp, you'll find that the movements are very unwieldy because your imp is so big. So if you want to go back to working on something small, always remember to change your imp reach again, make it small and appropriate to the scale of the object that you want to work with. So now this is more like it.
And one other final point on that is that you can press that red button there with the one-to-one imp reach on it, and that will reset your imp reach to the default distance.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about zooming quickly, because when you set the imp reach, you see the number flash up because you're pressing both the move buttons. But if you hold them down and move the imps together or further apart, you can zoom in and out. What does that do?
That basically zooms you in. So it's like very much a variant of the imp reach, but you do it gradually. So if you press the two move buttons like that, like Richard was saying, and you sort of open your hands while zooming, you can see that you're zooming in, and this number is getting 3x, 4x. I'm getting more zoomed in, and you see how tiny your imp is now. If I go inside the sculpture, I can work on it and do very, very small operations with my tiny imp, like there. So the zoom is very useful for sculpting small detail, like this tiny little indentations that I've done on the sculpture. And exactly the same, the opposite applies as well. By pressing the two move buttons and pinching in like that, it zooms you out. So it's a variant on the imp reach, but you have much more control on exactly how much zoom you want.
Basically, to put it simply, it changes your imp reach and it moves you towards the thing that you're hovering over at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, talking about moving around, there's another thing you can do, which is fast move.
Yeah.
So the secondary triangle button, so the triangle on the secondary controller, is a little bit like the L1 button on the DS4 in that it changes the thing that other buttons do. So what happens if you hold that button and you tap one of the move buttons?
When you when you press the triangle and tap the move, it zaps you to where you've pointed your primary controller, like that. And it's relative to your imp scale. So if I am small like that and I've just zoomed right in and I quickly want to go to that mountain top over there without changing my imp scale and keeping that small imp, you use that technique. You press the triangle on the secondary controller, the move button on the primary, and that takes you all the way to that point that you've pointed to, while keeping your imp at the size that you were. That's quite useful when you're, for example, putting, let's say we have a small tree decoration that we are filling in our world like that, and we want to keep placing it around. So but I want to keep placing it in that scale. So I put 3 of them here, and then I hold that, take a clone of it, turn around, and while holding it, I point towards where I want to go, and I zap there in the same scale, put a bunch more there, take it again, fly all the way to the other side, and put it again. So these are different techniques. Actually, one of the very good uses of this fast zapping is that it applies also on all gadgets. So if you have a timeline, for example, like that, and you have it open, and you put it on somewhere comfortable in your scene and you're working on it, and then you just went into your scene, you're doing some stuff and you want to get to it fast, again using the triangle on the secondary controller and the move button on the primary, you press one press and it takes you all the way.
Yeah.
It's very useful, especially for people who have many different tweaks and things in their
the tweak menus and gadget menus open, then you can zap between them quite quickly using that technique. So let's move on to moving stuff and manipulating stuff. So how do you grab something and move it around?
Okay. So to grab, like Richard touched on earlier, I'll just delete this. So the grabbing is the one thing that we have an exception for. As Richard said, you can grab anything in your scene, no matter what your imp reach is. So even though my imp reach can only get to that platform there, I can grab by just pointing at any object I can see, and as soon as I press my T button on my primary controller, it grabs it. That's kind of like the only exception, the only one-to-one feature. We thought it's a very useful exception to have because it allows you to be working over here, for example, and then nudge this mountain a little bit while you're still here. So we call that I don't know if we have a name for it,
Just
but
call it grabbing.
Grabbing, yeah. So basically the premise of grabbing is whatever you want to grab, you look, you point at it, you press the T button, and you got it. Once you do what you want, whether you want to bring it over, you want to move it, you want to nudge it a tiny bit. And it's worth mentioning that if you half press the T button on anything that you've grabbed, it moves it very gently in a sort of dampened way. So it allows you to have even better control.
It's quite good for when you're refining the position of something.
Yeah, like for example, like I'll put this here and then try to place this exactly on top of it. So you kind of get it roughly where you want, and then with that half press you can really nudge it into place like that.
Lovely. Okay. And rotating, I guess, comes along for free really with grabbing. Unlike with the dual shock, you can just literally grab and rotate in one move.
This is actually, I have to say, one of the reasons that I really enjoy using the motion controls, because in 3D in general, one of the biggest problems in 3D manipulations was rotating, because you have to know, am I rotating around which axis? While here it's kind of like all you need is the motor skills. You grab something, you turn your hand, and you get this one-to-one behavior that I think is great for composition. So quickly with one asset you can get very artistic, because you don't have to, I think, spend a lot of time just trying to get that rotation right, and you sort of, is it this, is it that? You literally just do that. And I want to recommend to you, always when you're placing things in a composition, you move them around, press the grab cram while you're moving, look around your composition, move again, look around again. That's kind of gives you a better 3D experience.
So that's the move button, the grab cam, and you can do that while you're grabbing things. So if you're grabbing an object, you can also then press the move button while you're still holding the object and move the camera so you can check where it is in 3D space.
And it freezes, when you do that, what Richard just said, it freezes completely that the object you're grabbing. This is a very, very, very useful technique in getting your positioning of your objects.
So, do you want to quickly mention realigning?
Yeah. So, if you build an object on the grid, I'm gonna turn the grid on, and I made, let's say, an architectural module like that here, and just
posh name for a box.
well, let's give it some detail. Here you go. So it's got like some side bits like that. Okay, so you got a module that was carefully built on grid, and then that module, you took it in your world and you just wonked it like that. And so a very fast way to return it back on the grid is grabbing it, and while grabbing it, you press the triangle button on the primary controller, and it zaps back to the grid.
The nearest 90 degrees, basically, in all the axes. So if you turn it more vertically, it will snap it to that axis.
It's very useful, because if you have multiple things like that, and then you just grab a line, grab a line, grab a line, grab a line, you just really get a quick fix. And if you've just placed them by eye, like Richard is saying, and I want to align these, so like that.
It also helps if, for example, you've modeled something off the grid, and then you turn the grid on, and then you use the realign, it will snap it to the grid and they won't wobble about.
Yeah, so I've turned the grid on like here, and now
there you go.
It's all perfect. This is very, very useful for when you sort of place things by eye first, and then you want to make them more perfect.
Okay, right, scaling. How do we scale, Kareem?
Scaling generally in Dream is pressing circle while pressing circle and twisting on the secondary controller. So first, if you point your primary controller on the object you want to scale, you don't have to grab it. You just literally hover over it.
So it's highlighted. You can see the outline there.
And then pressing circle and twisting on my secondary controller like that, you can see it scaling it in the place that it's in.
And it will also scale around. We use the place where you've hovered over it. You can see the end of the imp as the center of the scale.
Yeah, so see, I put it on the top of that cone, so it's scaling it from there, while if I put my tip there, it will scale it from here. That's proper useful when you are scaling objects that you've placed in the world and you don't want to move them from where they are, you just want to scale them up and down. But also this scaling is applicable to when you have an object grabbed in your hand like that, and then pressing again the circle and twisting also does the same scaling thing, but now it's also in my hand. So you can use this technique here where you have an object and I'm scaling it while positioning it, taking a copy, scaling it again, positioning it, scaling, position.
Cool. How about flipping? How does that work?
Flipping in using you need to be grabbing an object like that, and then you press square on the secondary controller and you get this arrows appearing on the screen, and basically you move or you gesture towards the arrow you want to flip. So if I go to the right like that, it flips to the right. If I press it again and go to the left, it flips to the left. If I press it again and flip to the top, it does it to the top and the bottom. So you can very quickly make things like that. So if I take a copy of it, flip it in the other axis, I can get the other side like that. And if I flip it to the bottom, I get it like this. Flip it the other way, I get it like that.
Okay, and what if I make something hideous and want to get rid of it? How do I do that?
To delete, you have several ways of deleting. Of course, there is on the palette menu, you can pick the delete tool, and once you pick the delete tool, if you press the T button on anything you want to delete, you can see it highlighting red first and then you delete it. But if you're in the move tool and you want a shortcut, a quick access to deleting, you press triangle on your primary controller over the object you want to get rid of, like so.
Okay, now if I mess something up, how do I undo it?
So undo and redo, the basic on palette versions are, you can find them in the beginning of the palette
assembly tools,
the assembly tools, and just by pressing using the X button on undo, you can see all the actions that I've undid here, or redo is the other one.
In fact, it's worth pointing out that you use the X button, the primary X button, to click on buttons in the UI, as opposed to using the T button on the primary controller, which you use to interact with things in the 3D space.
Yes. The shortcut to undo and redo is quite funky. So you press the square button on the primary move controller, but you have to point or tilt your hand towards the left to undo, like that. So I'm pointing to the left and pressing the square and it undoes. And to redo, I point to the right and press to redo.
And you'll see the things that you're undoing and redoing at the bottom of the screen, so it will remind you what you did in that move, in case it's not visible on the screen.
If you're not looking at all and you're doing operations, it's telling you that some deletions are happening over there somewhere.
Okay, how do I copy things that I like?
Okay, so the best friend of making any compositions in Dream is the clone tool. We all love the clone tool. It looks like those sheep there. If you access it from the assembly menu and press it with the X button, you get the clone tool, and then any object that you press the T button on will be copied like that.
Just like grabbing, except that it will leave the original behind.
And copy. And you can, while you copy that clone, remember you can always scale it as well while you are cloning. So you can do variety or variating the scale as you go. So it's a very nice way of expanding environments, just doing a clone, a bigger, smaller, and it's one of the fastest ways, using very few assets to make a whole scene from them.
What's the shortcut?
So the shortcut, if you are in the move tool but you want a quick access to the clone tool, you press the triangle button on the secondary controller and then grab, and that gives you a quick clone operation. So we added that because when you're moving things around and in your default sort of state, but you decided to have a quick clone, you press that triangle shortcut, and now you have that clone with you straight away, and you can get it like that. Triangle on the secondary
Which
control.
is a bit like a shift on a keyboard, like we talked about before.
Yeah.
To be honest, most of the, like you were saying about the painterly not having to go to the menus, most people will only use the shortcuts.
Absolutely.
Using the moves. So we talked about cloning. How about the exciting, show-offy repeat cloning?
Oh, that's the best. So basically, the recursive cloning is when you clone, and I've done a copy like that. Before letting go of the T button, it's still, that clone is still in my hand. If I press triangle on my primary controller, it adds a copy, another one. And if I press it again, it adds another copy, and again another copy. And the distance between the first and the second is carried across to the copies. So you can see, we call it like recursive. If I turn, they all turn. It's a brilliant way of doing architectural modularity. If I have it without the grid on, you can do all sorts of Inception-esque type creations. Usually tentacles is the go-to.
Tentacles are all like bridges and stuff.
Like,
so if I wanted to create a bridge to a specific spot, there's a way to do that as well, isn't there?
yeah, and so if I basically let go, when I let go, by the way of my clones, it places them where you left them and automatically puts a selection around all the copies, which is a very useful thing. It gives you the choice to say, if you want to group these now, you can, or if you just want to move them as a whole, you can. So it gives you that choice as well. But what Richard was saying is, I'm going to undo this, and basically the second way of cloning is you take a copy like so, and rather than pressing triangle to add an extra one, you press square on the primary controller, and that places the copies between the first and the last. So, and the more you press square on your primary controller, the more copies it places. So that's an amazing way of getting your stair to go to exactly a point in space. Let me build a platform. I'll put the grid back on and make it, we have a level over here that we want to get up to, and I'll take this step and then use the in-between method like that. And you just add as much copies as you need, and then when you let go of the T button, it placed them in the world. Again, you can see the selection it's automatically all selected, giving you the choice to say, oh, I actually want to group that in one family like that. So now this stair is always going to be one piece. So it's an assistant to you. If you don't want to group it, you don't.
It's worth pointing out a lot of these things are the same for DS4, just the button combinations are different.
Yes. Again, if I hold it and realign, it will work that's a good example of realign. I can just now select this and grab it, and once I press the realign, it placed it back on the grid, so you can make it
grid.
Yeah, on the chunk. Oh, it's quite a big grid. Yeah.
It's a big grid.
Yeah, it's a big grid. Yeah.
Impressive grid.
Yeah.
Can you show us how to select by hand?
Okay. So selecting in your scene, you can see that every object that you hover over highlights like this. Selecting, you press the X button on your primary controller over anything you want to select. So, and it's additive. So the more things you select, the more it adds them to your selection set. To deselect, you just press X on the thing again, and you can see it's deselected again.
You can also, if you hold X on something, you can then swipe across things to add them to your selection.
Like a paint selection like that.
Yeah.
So you can just paint, and you get everything real quick.
Now also I've heard a little birdie said you could double click, is that right?
Yeah, so if you double click,
it selects everything in that scene, or if you're in a group, it will, if you're scoped into a group, which we'll talk about in a moment, it will only select the things that are inside that group.
So if I, I'll show you actually, I'll scope into that group.
In fact, that was the next thing we were going to talk about, was scoping. So
okay, so there you go. So if you go into to scope into a group, as Richard mentioned, you select that group, because we grouped them together earlier, and you can scope in by, again, the menu way. You just press on this button. Oh, always, by the way, it's worth mentioning that all the context buttons that we have in Dream in the DS version will appear on the side of the screen, while in the Move or the motion controller version, they appear on your secondary controller. So be careful if your hand is outside of the view and you've done a selection like that. The context buttons are actually on your secondary controller, but you might not see them because you forgot about that. So make sure.
They will also appear even if you don't hold the secondary T button. But if you do hold the secondary T button, they will still be there. They'll just be on the bottom row.
Yeah, so that row below is always the context ones.
So, do you have to select in order to scope in? I don't think you do.
No. To scope in, you can do the... To scope in with the menu, you need to select it, and then you have this arrow here which allows you to scope in. But if you want to do the shortcut way of scoping in, you use the triangle on the secondary controller and X on the primary one, while hovering your primary imp over the object you want to scope into, like this. And when I press the X, it entered that group. You can see everything else now is grayed out, and now I've entered. And again, the shortcut to exit this group, either I press on the arrow like this and it exits me, or the shortcut to exit, I press triangle on the secondary controller and circle on the primary one, and that exits me.
So X is select and circle is deselect. So those are on the primary controller. And if you hold shift, they are scope in and scope out.
Yeah.
Now it's worth pointing out as well that you can scope into any object. If it's not a group, then you will automatically enter the mode to edit that object. So for example, if you scope into a single sculpt, you'll enter sculpt mode and you'll be able to edit that sculpt.
And because in the move scheme, when you scope in, you're now in sculpt mode, but you can't see the sculpt menu available unless you press the secondary trigger. So you can scope in and kind of go, oh, what's going on? Where am I? Just remember the menu is there, but you just have to always activate it with the T button.
But usefully, in most cases, when you scope into a sculpt, it will automatically equip the smear shape tool, so you can jump into a sculpt and immediately start fiddling with it.
Yeah, so like a workflow, for example, if I am carving on this tree here, or this shape, and then I exit and go to that one over there and just fly to it using that shortcut we showed you earlier. I can carry on doing this operation, and then you can scope to another object in the scene directly as well. Like if I just put from within sculpture here, I'm sculpting, and then I just want to go directly to that one. So I press the shortcut, triangle, and the X, primary X, and it directly takes you to that other sculpture. So you don't have to scope out and then into the another one. You can just directly go to another one like that.
But handily as well, if you do that direct scope between two things, it will keep the tool active that you had previously in the other sculpt. So if you're spray painting, for example, and you're spray painting one sculpt, and then you decide you want to spray paint a different one, and you jump in there, it will just keep the spray paint tool active.
Like this here, spray paint, and then quickly go to the other one and carry on.
There you go. In fact, we're going to talk about sculpt mode now.
Yes.
Which is your favorite mode, isn't it?
Oh yeah. In sculpt mode we did a lot of what we're showing you here, all these sort of secret, not secret, but all these shortcuts and super
things, yeah.
And you know, you will learn them really fast. It's not something that maybe when you watch these sort of videos, when you hear them all laid out on you like that, it sounds like a lot, but once you know them and get used to them, it becomes really enjoyable. Okay, so which is next?
Okay, so we're on to sculpting now. So you were carving into those things. How do you switch between additive and subtractive sculpting?
Okay, so when you're in sculpt mode and you pick either a stamp or smear shape, and it usually defaults in smear, but I'm just going to pick the stamp. The gesture to go between adding and subtracting is this gesture. How do we call it, Richard?
Well, you tap the secondary sphere to the base of the primary motion controller, which is a bit of a mouthful.
Yes.
But that is the technical way to describe it.
Yeah, but honestly, this is, you can do that, by the way, again, just from the menu here. You toggle between, see, here is adding like this, and if I press this, it goes to subtract. But imagine every time you want to go between add and subtract, you have to do that. You'll go crazy. And basically, we added this gesture, and it's the most common use in sculpture. You see, you go and you start carving, and then you go to add. You add, and then you do the gesture, you cut and scale. As we showed you, the scale is universal, so the circle and twist you always do. So that sort of...
Yeah, actually on that point,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, before we go on to the sexy, exciting things, all the assembly tools we've already shown you, like deleting and cloning and stuff, all work in sculpt mode as well. The only thing you can't do is select your individual edits.
Yes. So basically, again, if you are in the move tool in sculpture, you will find that you can move all those edits that I've previously placed like that. I can clone them with the shortcut that we've the same way that we've done the cloning. So I've just, if I clone here and then add with the triangle on the primary controller, it will add, and if I press the square, it will reduce, and when it goes below the one, it puts them in between like that. But of course, because this is a sculpture, it's doing this operation within the sculpture.
What's next? So let's have a look. So let's have a look at the gesture for changing the form of your shape.
Oh, there you go. That's my fave. So
Your other fave.
My other fave. They're all my all my babies.
They're all
My
your babies.
Yeah. There was a lot of love and work that went into these. Anton Mikhailov did some of these brilliant concepts, and then Liam took it further and just made them all sing. Really, the amount of work that went into the tools, and of course the technology of Simon underneath, is something else. So every shape that you get from your sculpt menu appears as a uniform version of that primitive. So the cube turns out like a normal cube.
Sure.
So if you want to make this into a rectangle, you go into the form state. The form state, basically, you tap the two spheres together, and once you do that, it puts you into this temporary state. You can see like my two imps are grabbing that object from the two corners, and as I move my hands, you can see the object is deforming accordingly. So I can do like one long thin shape like that, and now that is my new edit, and I can just work with that. If I'm like laying down floor panels, for example, you can use that.
Or you can smear as well.
You can smear with it
long shape.
here. So using that shape that I've done, I can smear with it.
And actually,
like that.
this is a good point to show the shortcut between smear and stamp.
Yes.
Perhaps.
So to go between the smearing and single stamp, you press the triangle button on the primary controller. So normally that triangle button deletes, except when you are using those tools. It will go quickly between the smear, and if I press it, it goes now to single stamp. And now I can't smear, it will only place one edit. The single stamp is very useful to go to when you need to use some of
my favorite thing, which we're going to talk about now. Stamp is where is the only way you can do soft blend in sculpt mode, which is my favorite thing, which is this freaky looking stuff. So you can't do that in smear shape, you can only do that in stamp shape. So that would be one reason to switch between the two.
Yeah.
So create something freaky for us.
Yeah, so that's brilliant for organic stuff. So again, I just went into the menu, I picked a sphere, and I tapped my two controllers together to make it an ellipsoid like that, and placing it in the world. Putting it, by the way, you can place in the world either by using the T button in the primary controller or pressing X. They both work. To use the soft blend, I press the square button on my secondary controller like that, and you can see soft blend dial appearing on the side of our screen. As I twist my hand, it gets more blended with the next objects beside it like this. So you can have a very tiny bit like that and make your blended shapes, or you can have it really on strong blend and get that sort of result. These are very useful when you're doing organic forms, anatomical forms.
You've probably seen Karim do them in the other live streams that he's done. Now you can also do soft blend with things like the spray paint tool.
Yes, indeed.
Which will make it soft. You can also change the color of your sculpts using the color palette, and also do subtractive soft blend as well. And it will blend the color, and it will, do all that sort of funky stuff. So,
I'm changing the color as Richard pointed out, and you can see the color is blending. And so if I switch the blend off like that and you place it, see the color just goes very crisply like that. But if I blend it, it will blend with the environment.
Will it blend looseness as well?
It will indeed. So just before we go to looseness, to show, Richard was mentioning the blending as well works on subtract. So this is without any blend. You can see a very sharp cut out of my sculpture there, but turning it on will make it more soft like that. This is one of the coolest features. So if I zoom right in, you can, and make my object small, you can see the level of fidelity you can get to. It's very similar to when you're using clay and just like pushing with your thumb.
That's why I love it so much, because I love clay stuff. Now, before we go too far away from the form thing that we showed, we should also show the make hole and section things as well. They're cool too.
Sure. So as we said before, I'm going to start a new sculpt actually. So going back into sculpt mode. As we said, while you're in this form state, you can stretch your object, and also before you lock it. So we didn't mention that when you're happy with the shape that you've deformed it to and you're cool with that, you press the secondary T button like once, and that freezes it into that new shape like that. But as long as you haven't done that, you're still in that form state. During that form state, before you commit that shape, if you press circle, which normally scales your object, but not now. If you press circle and turn your hand, you get the holes, and the more you turn, the larger the hole. So that's a shortcut, an easy way to do holes in your primitive.
And it's worth pointing out that does not work for all primitives, all the shapes, but it works for a lot of them.
And look, this is the technique you want to play with. You make, or you decide on the shape you want, and then you go, okay, that's kind of cool, I'll make a hole. And then when you let go of the circle, you still have this primitive in the form state. You haven't committed it yet. So once you're happy with that, you go, okay, I'm happy with that. Now that becomes my new primitive that I can work with. You can either smear with it, and make an artistic structure like that, or if you want to be more architectural, which suits this feature more, you can have your grids on, and then you make windows and stuff like that on the grid. So I've done a hole like this, and then you can place them actually properly on the grid like that.
You've never had it so easy. Now show us the section thing as well.
Sure. So so basically another thing as well, while you're in the form state, and remember, because we've put a hole in it, it still has that. So if I want to go back to not having this, I go and reselect the primitive again, and it sort of brings it back to normal. So when the section feature, when you are in the form state, whether you have a hole or not, but I'm gonna have a hole so it looks better, by pressing square on the primary controller while you're in that state, it makes a section. First it goes to the half, and then the quarter, and then the full again.
So it sort of cycles between them.
Yeah.
Now we haven't got a lot of time left, so we need to speed up a little bit.
That's going to be challenging.
Okay, I'll keep you on track.
Keep me.
So we've covered section. Now, do you want to show us how to extrude?
Oh yeah, I can't say my favorite again.
No, it's your other favorite.
Okay, look at this one. It's basically when you are in the form state again, if you move your hands together to get to the shape being almost crushed and flat like that, you can see now it looks hollow and doesn't have the primitive anymore. If I lock to that, now that puts you in another way of sculpting via extruding instead of placing primitives. That is a familiar to anyone who used like line tools or extruding tools in general in other software packages.
And you can combine that with the hole tool and the other tools to do architectural stuff.
Absolutely, especially
And the
again
grid,
on the
yeah.
grid. So if I have the grid on and I get this extrude business, you can then start doing creations that look like that. And you can extrude walls, you can do a very thin one like that and make a wall, extrude it up. And a lot of people might prefer working in that way. An important thing on that tool is that even though it's extruding, it allows you to rotate the object while you're extruding it. For example, if you want to make a ramp, that's quite handy to do that, like this sort of thing. But if I want to disable this rotation and I want pure extruding, you turn on the upright guide, and now that will only extrude and not rotate. So you can just extrude
it to the surface that you're placing. No, we'll keep it to 90 degrees to the grid.
Yeah, because we have the grid on. If I have the grid off, then it will only extrude and not rotate. I'll show you in a sec. But this is really a very nice way of making architectural experiments.
What we should probably do
Yeah.
is do another session just on guides.
Oh, absolutely.
And we'll move quickly on to another gesture.
Okay.
Because guides is a whole other thing that we could teach you about.
Cool.
So let's have a look at the... You've looked at soft blend. Should we have a quick look at the soft blend, hard blend toggle?
Yes.
Which we should have done before, but sorry, I forgot.
No problem. No, I jump as well. So when we were showing you earlier remember we need to be in single stamp,
Yeah.
and then I turn on the blend and it blends.
Yeah.
While doing that, while pressing the soft blend dial,
Which is what, square on the secondary controller?
yes, if I press triangle on the primary one while doing that, it goes between the two modes of blending that we've got.
Soft blend and hard blend. And hard blend will give you an angular blend.
That's kind of more faceted for your
for doing crystals and
indie game look.
yes. Low poly for the win.
Yeah, I love that. This is really a beautiful blend mode to use if you want to make lovely structures.
Yeah.
And again, it works with the cutting as well.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Now let's have a look at looseness quickly.
Sure. So for the looseness,
because obviously Dreams' style is a lot about painterly looseness.
yeah. So you default when you start sculpture on this sort of sharp shapes, but if you press square, X on your secondary controller and twist it, then you can see the object gets fuzzier like this, and you can start working with a more impressionistic shape like that. You pick the style you want and it changes the style.
Now how do you toggle? Now there's two kinds of looseness, isn't there?
Yes.
Uniform looseness and variable looseness.
So I'll pick.
What's the difference and how do you get between them?
So the default is uniform looseness, and basically when I turn on the dial, you can see that all the object evenly becomes looser.
The flecks are all the same size.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
But if I am, again, while pressing this dial and I press the triangle again, it goes to the other form of looseness, which is the varying looseness. And you can see the varying looseness basically loosens the flex on the object, but not on the edges of
So
it.
it keeps the hard edges by making the flex smaller.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to run out of time, so we need to hurry up.
Very good for
So-
texturing this one.
Okay, and you switch. So the looseness is on which button? Just to recap.
Looseness is on X on the secondary controller and
hold
twist.
that and spin it and twist it rather.
Yeah.
And you change while you're doing that. You can press triangle on the primary controller to switch between them.
Yes.
Okay, so spin. Do you want to show spin?
Spin. Let's go. We'll do more and more twitches of actually the techniques involved in these. This is literally to show you the shortcuts.
Yeah.
So to spin an object, you double click on the secondary controller circle button like that. And you can see that on my secondary imp, I've got this spin shape icon. And then I hover my secondary controller over the object I want to spin, hold the T button, spin it, and you can see the shape is spinning now. Once I start drawing with my secondary controller, my primary controller, you can see that I'm smearing a spinned shape. Now to stop the object from spinning, I tap it once with the secondary T button and over the object and it stops. To spin it again you have to double click on circle, spin. You can spin very slowly.
You can spin in multiple directions as well.
Absolutely. So I can spin like that first and then spin like that, and it layers the two spins on top of one another like a sort of almost
double spin frenzy.
Double spin frenzy. So you get like really crazy stuff like that.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
We want to cover as much as we can. So what about the curve tool? Should we quickly show that?
Okay. Curve tool. There is more nuances in the spin. We'll tell you later about those.
We'll do more. What we'll do is, if you want to see more of a particular subject, just let us know in the chat, or you can, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll make particular.
Our usual social media channels.
Cool. You wanted the curve tool.
Yes, the curve tool is a special kind of brush shape.
It's
right?
the last one in our primitives.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. And by default, if you go and pick that, it takes you to this sort of.
Which is great for creating things that look like you wouldn't want to touch them.
Yeah, or organic. So that curve tool defaults to drawing curvy shapes like that. But if you do the form
thing,
gesture again, you see that it's now turned into a spline that my two imps are holding the two ends of it. This is useful to doing archways and stuff like that. If I scale using the X button on the primary controller, scales this side, and the circle and twist on the secondary controller scales the other side. So like that you can control the scale. You can have one side big, one side small to make a horn like that, for example.
Yeah, good for horns.
And once you're
claws. And you can also combine it with repeat clone and stuff to create some incredible organic structures.
So like that, for example, again, like the form, it hasn't committed yet until I hit the T button on the secondary. And now it become a shape that I can work with and create, let's say, a tree, for example.
Okay.
Here.
We need to move on.
Okay.
Right, next, mirror. This shows how to do mirror mode quickly.
Okay.
We're going to do this speedy fast.
Speedy fast.
We don't want to cut anything out, so we're going to just go super quick, and you can always rewind it on YouTube or whatever.
Okay. So to the gesture to mirror, you tap the two backs of the controllers together like this, and it activates mirror.
Now it's also important to note that your mirror plane will always be where your first edit was placed in that sculpt.
Yes.
So if you want to use the mirror, properly, it's always worth knowing that in advance, and maybe using the grid or something to make sure your first edit is in the right place and your plane will go there. You can't edit the mirror plane after the fact.
Yes, very important tip this.
Okay, and that's turn that on and off by gently touching the bases of the two controllers together.
Yes. And you can see the mirror plane here. You can keep working in mirror and hide the mirror plane if you want from this toggle in the menu. So that hides the mirror plane but keeps you in mirror.
Okay, now there's a couple more things. The color picker and the color tumbler. Do you want to quickly run through those? I'll give you a few seconds to do that.
Few seconds, my God, these need days. The color, so Richard touched on, we start by having our basic colors in the menu, but the advanced color picker, you do this gesture here, which is, how do you describe it?
Oh, well, color picker primary sphere to secondary base.
So I never can say those. Primary sphere, secondary base.
Right,
there.
that brings up the color picker.
And that color picker is the advanced one where you can pick whatever color and hue you want, and off you go. Once you're happy with it, you press circle and you've got that color.
Also, if you click, once you've picked a color, you can add it to your palette by pressing the plus sign, save color. You can also create a tumbler. Now, let's quickly show us that.
A tumbler is very, in principle, you drag colors from the middle bit here, and you drag them by pressing the T button and dragging that color and intersecting it with the blob at the bottom. So
that's a technical term.
Yeah, and then so the more you put it, the smaller it is, the less influence it will have. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. Now I've got this blended color. If I don't spin it and I just close my color picker, you close your color picker advanced.
You can save a tumble as well, by the way.
Pressing
that,
this,
yeah.
And then it will go up here.
Yeah.
But to close that menu, you either do the gesture again, or you press circle and you're out. So to use the tumbler, you can either leave it static like that, and every time you use it, you get a different color from that tumble.
Okay, and how do you do the other way?
You just spin it like that.
With what button?
With the T button, grabbing
primary
and
T, okay.
Yeah, primary T, and then you can see that your object is changing live like that.
How exciting. Now can we quickly run through the rest of them? Tom's giving me eyeballs from behind the camera. So,
how many do we have left?
Let's have a quick look at paint mode.
Okay.
So let's have a look at you've seen the sort of twisting on the secondary controller with the various buttons. Let's just quickly have a look at what those do in paint mode, because they have slightly different functions.
Okay, so I've just gone into paint mode now, picked the stamp fleck.
Yeah, and you can do...
And then I just make it larger.
Do scatter.
So X on the secondary controller and twist does a scattered cluster like that.
And that's a very three-dimensional cluster. Now there's also the fade stamp,
which on the pressing square and twisting,
but like soft blend,
it makes a more of a fall off around that fleck.
And that's also a much flatter splat.
Yes.
You can combine them, can't you?
Yes, so you can have scattered and fade together,
right.
And that's very good for making clouds.
Or foliage and stuff like that. Okay, so
opacity you can control in those three. Actually, the shortcuts we're going to tell you apply to the three of them. So if you are in brush or pen or draw or rule, if you press the and turn the X, it does a scattered mark, so you can have a more wild mark like that. If it's on nothing, it's a more of a planar one, and the opacity takes it down and makes.
Opacity?
So the opacity is square on the secondary controller and dial it down, so you get very light marks like that.
So I mean, play around with these different button combinations. They're all context sensitive depending on what tool you're using.
Yes.
You can use the imp tooltips to help you. They will show you around your imps. You can see, depending on what tool you're holding, it will tell you a lot of the buttons that you can press. You can also click on the top left corner on the icon for the mode you're in, and it will give you some useful things there, which are for the move controls if you're using those. What about, do you want to, right, there's three more things. Can we speed through them?
Absolutely. We've
got a thumbs up.
Okay.
Don't panic, kids.
Okay.
So, coat, style and effects.
Okay.
Go to town on this scene with coat, style and effects.
Ooh.
We want to see the volume brush.
Okay.
Then we want to see the superstar, but we'll go through them one at a time.
Okay.
I won't bombard you.
So basically, I just copied this a few times. Now, if I go to the coat tool, normally that defaults to a way of application that you can see. I've picked the first one, which is just tinting, and if I hold my imp over the object with the color I've picked, let's pick green, strong green color, and you can see the more I hold over the object, it's going to tint it like that. That's the basic principle. Now, if I'm in any of the tools, code style,
primary trigger,
primary trigger, the more you hold it, the more it adds. And if I go to the subtractive side, like add and cut in sculpture, but here it will remove the tint that you've put, so you can add and subtract the effect like that.
This works in most, if not all, the tools in coat style and effects modes. It will add or subtract
the effect
using the same button combination and additive or subtractive.
Now the volume brush that Richard mentioned is a feature that is very useful when using these tools. How to activate volume brush is that when you're in either code style or effect, pressing circle or on your secondary controller will show you this box at the tip of your imp. This now is a volume application tool rather than applying before, where your imp is just hovering over even.
A bit like when you grab, we mentioned earlier, didn't we? As long as you highlight it, you can
it will
it.
Yes.
But with the volume brush, it becomes
3D
space relative.
It has to intersect with the object that you're on. So just to show you the difference, see this mountain over there? It's very far away from me, but even though it is, I can still tint it like that. But as soon as I have the volume brush on, the volume brush will only affect what it intersects. Now, why is this useful? That's very good when you want to affect something particular.
Do some looseness.
Okay, so
it'll be more visible.
So if I go to the looseness here and I apply looseness, I'm just going to apply it on this object, this one here.
But you can do multiple objects at the same time.
And I can make it like really large and loosen up everything that falls into its reach. So you can see like all the objects now are getting affected really quickly by this technique. The nice thing about that is that that's a way of impressionistic application. You can
use the select thing to filter what you're affecting.
Yeah, that's a very useful and unique feature to the volume brush. And what that is, if I just undo so you can see it better. Normally, if I am in the cut tool like that and I don't have the volume brush and I have multiple things selected like that here, and I go to tint them in red, for example, even if I'm just over this one only and I press it, you can see everything in my selection is getting tinted. But I'm going to undo now. If I have
it's
my
like a mask, yeah,
if I have my volume brush on and the same selection and now do it, it will only apply on the object that I'm hovering over like that.
Isn't that one sculpt?
Yes. It's one sculpt. I'm like, oh my god, it's not working. No, it isn't. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. So again.
So something's changed there.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll skip over that one.
Well, it will affect them all then.
Okay, super style. Show us that quickly.
The super style. Super style, I would think needs a demo on its own, but just a very quick description of it. This in style tool, you have singular tools here that apply different style manipulations on the objects. Super style basically has a combined power, so you can basically, if I pick, let's say the circly one, super style will apply my where is it? There we go. I need to unselect. Yeah, so super style both applies over the object, and you can see here. You can see I'm basically applying the effect. I can change the resolution. Let me get something close to the screen so you can see it better, like this. And I get the super style again.
Super style basically puts the all the tools from style mode into one tool so that you can use the different button shortcuts to adjust them all independently without having to go in and out of the palette.
Yeah,
to get the different ones.
Here we go. Let's just do it on a new fresh object. You can see, yeah, there you go. So you can just apply like that, and you changing both the size of the fleck. I can comb the direction of it as well, and I can change the impasto of that fleck all in one tool
without going to the menu.
They're all using basically the same shortcuts that we've been going through. X and square, while twisting will control in the super style tool. X controls the looseness and the square controls the impasto. I'll do a separate Twitch once to go through actual techniques that we can use. This is mainly to just let you know
this is the gestures and moves and buttons and things.
Okay.
One final thing is if you hold the secondary square and twist the controller when you're in coat style or effects mode tools, it will affect the flow rate that you apply the effects.
Makes them very, basically like the default, you can see changes into red quite slowly, and if I want to change that and make it quite fast, I go the rate, increase the rate slider, and now you can see it just changed it very fast.
Now, we were going to talk about play mode, but actually that's covered in the tutorial, which is included in the beta, how you control puppets with the move controllers. So just play that tutorial and you'll figure out how to do that.
Cool.
I hope this was helpful.
Yeah.